$4 billion. One signature. Zero outrage. That was all it took to bring America to the edge of one of the most dangerous deals in its recent history. The quiet sale of a strategic U.S. port to a foreign power with a long memory and silent intentions. No headlines, no breaking news, just a handshake in a boardroom and silence in the halls of Congress. Everyone looked away, except one man. J.D. Vance stood up when it was easier to sit down. He spoke when every voice around him was bought, bent, or buried. He read every page of the contract no one wanted made public, and what he found could have changed the balance of power, not just for today, but for decades. This is the story of the $4 billion deal that nearly sold part of America, and the one man who tried to stop it. And while what you're about to see is a dramatized reconstruction inspired by real concerns, real patterns, and real silence, every emotion you'll feel is absolutely real. Because sometimes fiction isn't far from truth, and sometimes the truth only survives when someone refuses to look away. Stay with us, because what nearly happened behind closed doors could have changed everything you believe about this country. The call came at 12:47 a.m. J.D. Vance wasn't asleep. He never really was these days. The amber glow from his desk lamp cast long shadows across these stacks of manila folders, maps marked in red ink, and a half-drunk cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. His personal cell buzzed against the oak surface. Unknown number. He hesitated. Only two kinds of people call at this hour, drunks or whistleblowers. He answered, "Senator Vance?" The voice was low, strained, like a man debating whether to speak or run. "You don't know me. I'm with the Dock Workers Union in Bayport, Alabama. I don't trust anyone else to say this to." J.D. straightened in his chair. "Talk. There's a delegation at the port. Foreigners. Suits, not dockhands. No press. No flags. They're not here to tour. They're here to take something." A silence hung, heavy in charge. "Who are they?" J.D. asked. The man hesitated. One of them dropped a card, Mandarin on the back. Another guy was translating into legalese. "They're walking with a rep from Gulf Coastal Holdings. Everything's off books." J.D. reached for a yellow notepad and began scribbling. "No local coverage?" he asked. "None," the voice said. "Not even a whisper. No city officials, no police escort. But we've seen them. Their cars are parked in the restricted area. Security's been told to stay flexible. Sir, they're being shown every inch of the port, like they already own it." The line went quiet for a moment, just the hum of night behind him. Then the voice broke. "They're taking photos of fiber conduits, asking about water depths. No one's saying who approved it. We asked one of the managers and he said, 'It's above your pay grade.'" J.D. felt a familiar fire rise in his gut. Not rage, recognition. This was how it always started. A handshake in the dark, a deal wrapped in contracts, and then ownership without anyone realizing they'd lost something. "Name?" J.D. asked. "You don't need it," the man replied. "Just don't let this get buried. We don't have another port." The line clicked dead. J.D. sat there for a long moment. The room was still, save for the distant hum of Washington's overnight street sweepers. He glanced at a framed photo on the wall, his grandfather in navy dress blues beside a battleship. He used to tell J.D., "America doesn't fall with a bang, it falls with a blindfold." And something about this felt like cloth tightening around the eyes. He opened his laptop and searched Gulf Coastal Holdings. Generic, bland, barely a trace online. Their homepage was just a photo of containers and a mission statement about partnerships for progress. He clicked About Us. No executive names, just a foreign phone number. J.D. leaned back. His instincts weren't just whispering now, they were yelling. A delegation with no press, a port with no oversight, a contract with no face. He reached for his landline. "Get my staff in at 7 a.m. and flag anything involving Bayport. I want flight logs, company filings, and Port Authority permits. If this is what I think it is, we don't have time to wait for headlines." He hung up. The screen before him glowed silently in the dark. But in his mind he could already hear it, the sound of steel gates closing, not just on a port, but on something far bigger. By 7:15 the next morning, JD's office was already humming like a command center on red alert. Staffers with bleary eyes and half-button collars leaned over laptops, digging, cross-referencing, pulling port records and public company filings. The scent of burnt coffee and quiet urgency filled the room. JD stood at the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, scribbling names in black marker. Bayport Authority, Gulf Coastal Holdings, Port Secure Logistics Ltd. Each name was circled, then linked by question marks and arrows like a conspiracy waiting to be proven. Across the room, Ellie, his policy analyst and former DOJ researcher, lifted her head. "We found the parent company," she said, voice cautious. "Port Secure is registered in the Cayman Islands. No physical office, just a P.O. box and 2 silent directors." JD narrowed his eyes. "Go on." "It gets worse," she continued. "They're listed as a subsidiary of a group called Shenghua Global Freight Partnership. Sounds neutral enough until you dig into it." She clicked her remote. The screen lit up with a logo, a blue cargo ship superimposed over a globe. Beneath it, Shenghua Global, delivering the future. "Shenghua is state-backed," she said, "tied to the Chinese Ministry of State Security through a network of development partnerships. They've already secured partial control of ports in Kenya, Sri Lanka, and Greece. But here's the kicker." She clicked again. A satellite image appeared. A port in Djibouti flanked by Chinese naval ships. "That port was just a shipping hub too," she said. "Now it's a forward surveillance node with underwater cable access, drone stations, and facial recognition at the gates." JD's jaw clenched. "And we're handing them Alabama." "It's not just shipping anymore," Ellie said. "It's infrastructure warfare, and we're 10 steps behind." He looked down at the Cayman address. "This company isn't buying land. They're buying proximity. Proximity to our fiber lines, our cargo data, our export routes, our people." Another aide added, "Their board members donated to 2 U.S. lobbying firms last year. Both firms pushed for open infrastructure partnerships on the Hill. It's wrapped in clean language, but the money's not clean." The pieces were coming together, but they didn't add up to anything good. JD stared at the board. The names, the arrows, the silence from the city council, the media blackout, the men in suits measuring a port like it was already theirs. This wasn't business. This was infiltration dressed in pinstripes. He thought back to the caller's voice, strained, fearful, begging not to be ignored. That fear suddenly made perfect sense. The enemy wasn't knocking at the door. It was already in the house, asking for the deed. "Start a back channel with the Commerce Committee," JD said, voice steady but cold. "They need to see this before it's dressed up as economic development. And get someone from intelligence. I want eyes on this company's satellite links and cyber patterns. If they're planning to wiretap a port, I'm not waiting for the ribbon cutting." Ellie nodded, already dialing, and as JD turned back to the board, something shifted. The air felt thicker, the stakes sharper. He wasn't chasing a rumor anymore. He was walking straight into a conflict the country hadn't even realized it was in. The hearing room on Capitol Hill looked exactly as it always did. Polished mahogany, orderly rows of chairs, the familiar circular seal behind the chairman's seat. But to J.D. Vance, it felt colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in tone. He stood at the front of the room, documents in hand, screen ready to present. Around him, 13 senators from the Commerce and Foreign Investment Subcommittee sat in loose semicircle, half glancing at their phones, one tapping a pen rhythmically against a notepad, 2 aides whispering behind him. Only 3 looked up as he began. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," JD said, voice firm, controlled. "This won't take long, but it should have come sooner." He clicked the remote. A satellite photo of Bayport lit up the screen, then overlays, ship paths, fiber cable routes, drone photos of the port's current security architecture. "This is what they're buying," he said. "Not just docks and shipping lanes, but a listening post disguised as infrastructure." No one moved. He flipped to the next slide. Shenghua's corporate ladder, layered with subsidiaries and front groups. A red arrow traced the ownership structure from the Cayman Islands through a Singapore intermediary and finally to a joint venture registered under China's Ministry of State Security. There is no public record of this company's lobbying activity, JD continued, but I have reason to believe they've funneled at least $2.1 million into PACs aligned with soft port expansion policies over the past 18 months. A few senators exchanged glances. He pressed forward. We've seen this pattern before, in Greece, in Sri Lanka, in Djibouti. Each time a neutral logistics company steps in, builds a commercial-only terminal, and within 2 years it becomes a strategic beachhead. Senator Howell, a polished man in his late 60s, leaned back in his chair with a tight smile. Senator Vance, with respect, every major port has foreign investment. That's global trade. JD didn't flinch. There's a difference between investment and infiltration, and we're about to learn it the hard way. A few quiet exhales. One senator looked at his watch. Another scrolled Twitter. JD clicked one last slide. A quote from Shenhua's own internal white paper, unearthed by his team. Control of maritime choke points enables leverage over trade-dependent nations. He paused, letting the words hang. And yet, the room didn't flinch. No outrage, no barrage of questions, just the dull echo of indifference. Senator Boyle cleared his throat. Do you have any direct evidence of military use or weapons transfers? No, not yet, JD said. Boyle shrugged. Then it sounds like we're speculating on intentions. That's a slippery slope. JD leaned forward slightly. It's only slippery if your eyes are closed. The chairman gave a dry nod. Thank you, Senator Vance. We'll take your concerns under advisement. And just like that, it was over. JD gathered his papers. No one stopped him. No one asked to see the files. As he turned to leave, the low murmur of staffers resumed. Laptops clacked. The room returned to business as usual, as if nothing had just been revealed. As he stepped out into the hallway, Ellie fell in beside him, a question already forming on her lips. He beat her to it. They don't see the fire, he said quietly. Then after a breath, yet. He didn't go home that night. Instead, JD returned to his private office. Windowless, quiet, stripped of ceremony. No mahogany panels, no C-SPAN cameras. Just 4 walls, 1 pot of burnt coffee, and a map the size of a chalkboard. It had started as a project months earlier, a visual database of port investments pinned out of curiosity, but now it had turned into something else, something surgical. He stood in front of it, sleeves rolled up, blazer draped across a chair. The United States was pinned in blue, but it was the rest of the world that bled. Dozens of red pins spanned coastlines from East Africa to Southeast Asia. Crimson threads connected Djibouti to Sri Lanka to Pakistan, Pakistan to Greece. Red loops tightened across continents like a noose around the arteries of global trade. JD picked up another pin and pressed it into Alabama. He stared at the pattern. Not a random scatter, but a strategy. And if you followed the threads long enough, they all traced back to one name, written in thick black marker just off the South China Sea. Shenhua Global. Behind him, Ellie entered without knocking, holding a file folder with worn corners. No new updates from the Commerce Committee, she said. It's gone quiet. Too quiet. JD nodded but didn't turn. It always does before it explodes. She glanced up at the map. Is that Greece? He pointed. Port of Piraeus, acquired in 2016. First came the logistics firm, then came the Chinese state engineers, then joint naval exercises, now permanent patrols in the Eastern Mediterranean. He traced another thread with his finger. Sri Lanka, Hambantota. They couldn't pay the debt, so they handed over the port for 99 years. And Djibouti? Ellie asked. JD's jaw tightened. Chinese military base, built under the guise of regional support. It's 6 miles from a U.S. installation. Our allies never saw it coming. He stepped back. That's the pattern. They start with ports, then fiber, then debt, then flags. Ellie stared at the web of red. But here, JD said, tapping the fresh pin in Alabama, they're not offering help. They're exploiting silence. Ellie opened the folder she carried. We pulled customs logs. Shenhua already moved technical advisors into Houston. Their visas list them as logistics consultants. JD turned toward her, eyes narrowing. They're positioning. They're testing our reflexes. She added, and we're failing. JD sat at the edge of the desk, suddenly silent. He looked back at the map. The lines weren't just showing where they'd been, they showed where they were going. And where they were going was home. He reached for a black pen and drew a circle around the Gulf Coast, then connected it to the red loops: Greece, Sri Lanka, Djibouti. When he was done, the shape was unmistakable. A global triangle, one that now pierced through American soil. Every one of these started as a trade partnership, JD said, voice low, and every one of them ended with a uniform, a camera, and a clause no one read. Ellie whispered, "Do you think we're already too late?" JD didn't answer. Instead, he pinned one last photo to the map, an aerial shot of the Bayport terminal with 3 black SUVs parked at the edge of a restricted access zone. He stared at it, and somewhere deep in his gut, the fire started to return. By the time JD Vance arrived in Bayport, the sun was already low, casting long, amber shadows across shuttered diners and dusted shop fronts. The welcome sign at the edge of town had paint peeling from the word opportunity. Beneath it, someone had spray-painted 2 bitter words in black. For who? His car rolled down Main Street past a hardware store turned storage unit, a pharmacy that no longer sold medicine, and an old shipyard cafe whose open sign hadn't lit up in over 2 years. The docks were still. Not quiet, still. There was no movement, no steel clank, no distant hum of cranes. Just the creaking of wooden pylons and gulls circling the empty yard like they, too, were waiting for something to come back. JD stepped out and walked toward the pier, passing fishermen who nodded politely but didn't meet his eye. One older man muttered, "You here to fix or to promise?" JD didn't answer, because he wasn't sure yet. Inside City Hall, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mayor Carla Fenton stood waiting, mid-50s, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. She greeted JD with a handshake that felt more like a challenge than a welcome. "Senator," she said, leading him into her modest office, "I imagine you're here to talk me out of something." "I'm here to understand why you said yes," JD replied. She gestured to a wall lined with framed black and white photos, Bayport in its heyday, cargo ships stacked 4 deep, men laughing with grease-streaked hands. Local papers with headlines like, "Record port profits set again." Then she turned to a second wall. This one had no frames, just a whiteboard with numbers. Unemployment, 19%. Median income, $26,000. Small business closures, 41 in 3 years. "I didn't say yes because I trust them," she said quietly. "I said yes because I don't have anything left to bargain with." JD took a seat. "You do have something. You have a port. That means leverage. That means a future." She shook her head. "It means desperation. They offer jobs, a logistics center, infrastructure upgrades, 300 positions in phase 1 alone. That's 300 paychecks. That's kids going back to school with new shoes. That's heating bills actually getting paid this winter." He listened. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. "But you've seen the map," he finally said. "You know what happens when these deals go through. Ask Sri Lanka. Ask Greece." Carla looked him dead in the eye. "And do those countries have Congress dragging its feet while towns starve? Did they get federal help before the wolves showed up?" He said nothing, because he knew she was right. "We didn't choose this, Senator," she added, softer now. "We were left behind long enough to be sold." JD stood and looked out the window toward the docks, sunlight hitting the rusted cranes like forgotten bones. He imagined the future she was offered: new lights, humming machines, people back at work. But beneath that vision, he saw another. Fiber lines rerouted, servers humming with backdoor access, quiet men in black SUVs charting the coast under foreign flags. He turned back to her. "I want Bayport to thrive, but not as a Trojan horse." Carla's voice dropped. "Then bring me an alternative, not a warning, a real plan, before they bring theirs in writing." JD nodded slowly, and as he stepped out of City Hall into a town torn between hope and survival, he knew the truth. They weren't just selling a port, they were mortgaging trust. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful. It sat on JD's desk when he returned from Bayport, resting alone atop the morning's thick stack of briefings, memos, and updates. No return address, no formal header, just three typed words at the top of the letter. From one who's watched. JD unfolded the single sheet of paper slowly, the creases sharp and deliberate. Senator Vance, I saw your face on the news last week. The hearing, the maps, the silence afterward. It was all familiar. I served in the Navy for 28 years, 15 of them aboard ships that docked in countries with ports bought and branded by foreign powers. First with money, then with cameras, then with laws that no longer belong to the people. JD paused, his eyes flicking back to the top of the page. The handwriting wasn't sloppy, but neither was it young. This came from someone who still pressed pen to paper when the world had gone digital, because some truths deserved the weight of ink. In Sri Lanka, we were told we were docking in a neutral site. By year 3, our patrols were logged, our radios intercepted, and local workers began disappearing if they asked the wrong questions. In Djibouti, we watched a red flag rise just 6 miles from our own base, and we were told to cooperate professionally. What I'm saying is simple. Once you let them dock, they don't leave, and you don't get your flag back the same way you lost it. JD leaned back in his chair, the words sinking slowly like weight into his chest. The past few days had been a blur of charts and headlines, opposition memos and economic forecasts. But this was different. This wasn't strategy. It was a scar. I understand Bayport is hurting. I've seen ports die. I've seen what poverty makes people agree to. But I've also seen what occupation looks like when it wears a suit instead of a uniform. The weapons may be quieter, but the wounds last longer. You may not win this one, Senator. You may stand alone. But I hope you'll stand. Because when they come with promises wrapped in contracts, they're not investing. They're replacing. Don't let the flag fall just because it's quiet today. No name signed, just a final line. I fought once for what docs carry. Now I write for what they mean. JD folded the letter back with quiet care and set it aside, atop the corner of the red-marked Bayport map. Through his office window, the Capitol dome stood still against a sky too calm for the thoughts racing in his mind. He thought of Mayor Carla's eyes, tired, hopeful, desperate. He thought of the red pins looping from continent to continent, and now he thought of this veteran, watching from afar, carrying memories that never made the headlines. He didn't know the man's name, but he knew exactly what he meant. Because it wasn't just about who owned the dock. It was about what kind of nation you become when you sell the things no one else is watching. The address came through a secure line. No name, no formal request, just a street, a time, and 3 words. Come alone, no staff. JD parked 4 blocks away and walked the rest, coat collar up, baseball cap pulled low. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that stuck to your skin and made everything feel slower, even your instincts. The warehouse loomed in the distance, rusted and slouched like it hadn't seen commerce in a decade. Inside, only one bulb was lit, flickering, yellow, barely reaching the corners of the wide steel space. The walls echoed every footstep. JD paused, adjusting to the dimness, letting the silence settle. Then a voice from the shadows. You came. JD turned. A man stepped forward, mid-30s, grease-stained boots, blueprints rolled under one arm, a lanyard half hidden in his jacket. I'm on the redesign team, the man said. Bayport Port Authority, subcontracted through Port Secure Logistics. I shouldn't be talking to you. JD didn't move. But you are. The man looked around, voice low. Because what they're building, it doesn't match what they filed. He pulled out a folded blueprint from the tube and laid it across a shipping crate. JD stepped closer. What he saw wasn't the standard infrastructure of a revitalized port. Instead, there were strange line markings, deep conduits running beneath cargo lanes, parallel but disconnected from sewage or telecom pathways. They're calling it utility redundancy, the engineer whispered, but it's not mapped into any municipal grid. These aren't for water, power, or fiber, and they're building shielding around them, like they expect to hide something or protect it. JD frowned. How deep? 14 feet, reinforced, with proprietary access panels. Military grade? The man nodded once. Or something close. They've brought in consultants from overseas. None of them registered with the U.S. Engineering Board. One of them had a badge that said he worked in Colombo. That's Sri Lanka. JD stepped back, heart ticking faster now. It wasn't just theory anymore. It wasn't global patterns and ominous debt traps. This was Bayport. This was under construction. The man hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. This has internal memos, CAD schematics, a flagged invoice for bulk material from a supplier tied to Shenghua. They scrubbed the metadata, but I saved a version before it was overwritten. JD took it silently, weighing it in his palm like it might burn through his skin. I'll be fired if they find out, the man said. Or worse. JD looked him in the eye. Then no one will ever know you gave this to me? There was a long silence between them. Then the man turned to go. At the door, he paused. They keep saying it's just logistics, he said. But tell me, Senator, what kind of port needs armored conduits beneath the shipping lanes? He didn't wait for an answer. When he was gone, JD stood there for a while, alone with the quiet hum of the dying light bulb and the weight of the flash drive in his hand. It was small, unremarkable, easy to miss. But in the right hands, or the wrong ones, it could tell a story no hearing room could ignore. And for the first time, JD didn't just feel suspicious, he felt hunted. The folding chairs were mostly filled by the time JD stepped onto the low wooden stage at Bayport's community center. The air inside was heavy with anticipation and the sour-sweet scent of too many styrofoam coffee cups. Locals lined the back wall, arms folded, eyes narrowed. They weren't there for politics. They were there for answers. The town hall wasn't supposed to be newsworthy. No press were invited, but JD's team set up a live stream on their own. Just a single camera on a tripod in the center aisle, pointed at the lectern where JD now stood with nothing but a notepad and a flash drive in his jacket pocket. He didn't open with greetings. He didn't thank the mayor. He simply looked out at the room and said, if you don't know who's buying your port, you're not selling infrastructure, you're surrendering it. A hush fell. He continued, voice firm but rising with each sentence. I've spent the last 2 weeks looking through contracts your city council hasn't even seen. Blueprints that don't match the permits. Engineers who won't show their IDs. And tonight, I'm telling you, what's coming through those gates isn't just cargo, it's control. Murmurs started in the back. He clicked a button on a small remote, and the screen behind him flickered to life. A map appeared, Bayport at the center, connected by red threads to Djibouti, to Colombo, to Piraeus. They follow the same pattern, he said. They start with jobs, then cables, then silence. By the time the cameras go up and the laws start changing, it's already too late. An older man near the front crossed his arms. So what? We're supposed to stay broke forever? JD looked at him, not with defiance, but with weariness. You deserve jobs, but not ones that come with a leash, not ones that let someone 8,000 miles away decide who can dock here and who can't. He tapped the lectern. Ask yourself, why are the contractors building reinforced underground tunnels no one is talking about? Why is this deal being brokered with no press, no oversight, no paper trail? He leaned forward, voice lowering. And why right now is a foreign-backed company quietly preparing to own the only deep water access point between Mobile and Houston? People began to shift. Whispers grew. Some looked at each other, uneasy. The tension became real, not abstract. And then, without warning, the screen behind him went black. The live stream camera's indicator light flicked off. The laptop streaming the event shut down with a soft electronic snap. Someone had killed the feed. JD looked down at his staffer in the front row, who mouthed, "We're offline." He straightened slowly, looked around the room and said, "There it is." Silence. They don't cut your mic when you're wrong. They cut it when you're right. Someone in the back clapped, then another, then more. The applause wasn't loud, but it was sharp, defiant. Later that night, someone posted a 43-second clip, shaky, film from a phone, of JD's final words before the blackout. The caption read, "He told the truth." They pulled the plug. By morning, the video had 2.4 million views. For the first time in this fight, JD Vance had struck a nerve. And this time, they couldn't mute the people. The voicemail light was blinking when JD walked back into his Senate office. 3 messages from reporters, one from a veterans group, and one labeled Unverified Caller 01186, a Beijing country code. He stared at the screen for a moment, then tapped play. "Good afternoon, Senator Vance. This is Li Chung from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China. I hope this message finds you well." The voice was smooth, fluent, wrapped in the kind of polished diplomacy that never quite said what it meant, but meant every word. "We've observed your recent remarks concerning Chinese development initiatives in your Gulf region. We wish to express our disappointment at the tone and implications. Such commentary, particularly when made in public settings, may foster unnecessary confusion and result in diplomatic discomfort." JD stopped the playback, then pressed it again from the top. Not because he didn't understand the words, he just wanted to hear how they were said. The tone was soft, but there was a steel edge beneath it, like silk pulled tight over a blade. He forwarded the message to Ellie without a word. Minutes later, she stepped into his office with a printout. "It wasn't just you," she said. "The embassy sent identical language to the Bayport mayor and 3 of your Republican colleagues. Almost word for word." JD raised an eyebrow. "And?" They all stayed quiet. He leaned back in his chair, letting that sit. Outside the window, the Capitol dome shimmered in the early afternoon light, iconic, immovable. Inside, everything felt colder. "They're testing us," he muttered. "Not with missiles, with silence. They're betting we'll blink." Ellie nodded. "This isn't just about the port anymore. The live stream clip has over 6 million views. Veterans forums are posting it. Trade unions. Even a few surprising corners of cable news." JD tapped the desk. "And that's why they called." He reached for the phone and dialed the number Li Chung had left. It rang once, then twice. Then, "Senator Vance," the voice answered. "I didn't expect—" JD cut in. "I heard your message. Let me save us both some time." A pause on the other end. "I don't respond well to veiled warnings. You don't get to call my town your Gulf region and then tell me how to speak in it." Lee replied calmly, "Senator, I assure you, our intent is purely cooperative. No, it's strategic, and the difference is not lost on me." Another pause. "We'd prefer to avoid escalation, Senator." JD's voice sharpened. "Then I'd suggest you stop digging tunnels under my country's ports." A longer silence this time. Then Lee said, "As you wish." The line clicked dead. JD hung up and sat there for a long moment, hands folded, elbows on the desk. He could feel it, the weight of the moment shifting. This wasn't local anymore. It wasn't a town or a mayor or even a state line. This was international, and the pressure would only grow from here. Ellie re-entered with a printed copy of the embassy's official statement. JD didn't even read it. He took out a pen and wrote a single sentence in the margin before pinning it to the office board. "Tell them I'm not in the mood for comfort." It started with a headline. Just after midnight, a small but respected online outlet, GulfWire, published a breaking article titled, "Exclusive, Secret Clauses in Bayport Port Deal Give Foreign Entity 40-Year Control." At first, it seemed like one more whisper in the growing noise. But then the article began circulating like wildfire across town group chats, union message boards, and veterans associations. By 6 a.m., it had been reposted by 3 regional papers. By 9 a.m., it was trending on social media. The contract, leaked in PDF scans and poorly redacted images, confirmed what many had dismissed as rumor. A 40-year lease agreement, foreign construction firms exempt from state permitting, and most explosively, a security clause granting authorized representatives of the operating entity full inspection access to secured cargo and personnel movement zones. JD stared at the document on his laptop screen. He read the clause again, then again. It didn't say U.S. Customs. It said operating entity, and the operating entity was Shenghua Global. Ellie walked in, her face pale, phone buzzing nonstop in her hand. "Sir, this is everywhere, and people are pissed." She didn't mean politically, she meant personally. Bayport residents were calling City Hall nonstop. Former workers who had supported the port deal were now demanding emergency town halls. School teachers, small business owners, retired dock hands, people who had quietly accepted foreign investment, now felt they had been played like pawns. One of the mayor's aides called JD's office directly. "She's overwhelmed," the voice said. "They're outside her door, yelling, holding signs. One of them's holding a copy of that contract, highlighted like it's a crime scene." JD could feel it, the emotional tide turning, not slowly, not gently, but like a dam bursting all at once. Because it wasn't just about economics anymore. It was about trust. People didn't care if jobs were promised. They cared that they weren't told what they were trading for them. They didn't vote for foreign inspection zones. They didn't know the contract was binding until 2064. They didn't know the steel beams going up at the docks were being shipped in from Guangdong. And now the betrayal wasn't theoretical. It was printed and underlined in red ink. JD opened the group message from his office staff. One image stood out, a photo of a gas station billboard on Highway 17. Someone had paid to put the leaked clause on it, word for word. Beneath it, "This isn't a deal, it's a surrender." Ellie returned with a fresh stack of updates. "The union's calling for a 48-hour walkout until the city addresses the contract publicly. 2 of your colleagues are asking if this was even legal, and..." She hesitated. "What?" JD asked. "One of our own just went silent. Senator Burke's office wiped all their statements about supporting the deal. No comment since last night." JD stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Capitol looked the same, untouched, unbothered, but the country below it, trembling. "They thought they could bury it in the fine print," he said, "but you can't redact betrayal." He turned to Ellie, voice steady now. "Get me Bayport's full agreement, the unredacted one. If they won't release it, we find someone who will." And as he sat down, the contract still open on his screen, one phrase burned brighter than the rest. "Inspection authority granted without prior notice or local approval." JD didn't need translation. That sentence said it all. The chamber was quieter than usual. Not because fewer people were there, every seat was filled, but because for once they were all listening. JD Vance stood at the center of the Senate floor, holding a copy of the leaked contract in one hand and the flash drive in the other. The redactions had been stripped, the signatures visible, the clause circled in thick black ink. Inspection authority granted to operating entity without local oversight. "This is not a debate over trade policy," JD began, voice controlled but taut like a drawn wire. "This is about who we let into the bones of our infrastructure and who we expect to leave when we ask them to." He paused to let the words settle. Behind him, staffers and aides sat motionless. In the press gallery, pens hovered in midair. Senator Mitchell, a seasoned Democrat from the coast, stood and adjusted his mic. "With all due respect, Senator Vance, you're blowing smoke. Ports across the country work with global partners every day. You're not sounding like a watchdog, you're sounding paranoid." Chuckles echoed in the chamber. A few heads nodded. JD didn't flinch. Another senator leaned in. "Are we really suggesting this is espionage? What next? Are we checking shipping crates for spies?" More laughs, this time sharper, meaner. JD looked down for a moment, then back up. And then he stepped away from the podium, not behind it, in front of it, arms down, voice steady. "You think this is paranoia?" He held up the flash drive. "This was given to me by a civil engineer working inside the Bayport redesign. It contains maps, structural schematics, procurement invoices tied to front companies already sanctioned by our allies." He walked forward a step. The room tightened. "You think I'm chasing shadows?" Sri Lanka thought the same. So did Greece. So did Kenya. Until the ships that docked started staying longer. Until the laws around them changed. Until the infrastructure they built was no longer ours. He turned, scanning the room. "You laugh at the idea of espionage inside trade deals. But you don't deny the clause. You don't challenge the signatures. You don't question the timeline." He pointed to the contract again. "This isn't a lease. It's a quiet occupation with a signature at the bottom. No one laughed this time. JD took a breath, then delivered it, the line that would replay across every evening news segment for the next week. You call this trade? I call it treason in slow motion. A stunned pause. Even the senator who had chuckled earlier now stared, jaw tight. Someone in the press row typed furiously. Another lowered their pen completely. JD stepped back, returned to his desk, and didn't say another word. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was louder than anything he could have shouted. Behind the scenes, staffers scrambled. Phones buzzed. Two senators requested emergency briefings from the Intelligence Committee. One even walked out of the chamber entirely. And for the first time, even those who thought JD was overreacting started to reread the contract. Not with skepticism, but with sweat forming at their temples. The meeting room in Bayport's municipal building wasn't built for national headlines. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The chairs were plastic and mismatched. A homemade Town First banner hung crooked behind the council dais. But tonight, it might as well have been a courtroom for history. JD stood quietly at the back, hands clasped in front of him. No press, no cameras. Just rows of folding chairs filled with townspeople. Some wearing work boots, some holding printed copies of the leaked contract, others just looking tired. The council members sat shoulder to shoulder, papers in front of them, microphones switched off until the final vote. Mayor Carla Fenton was already there, face unreadable. She caught JD's eye for a moment, then looked away. It wasn't contempt, it was weight. A local woman spoke first during public comment. My father worked this port for 30 years. I buried him last fall. He'd be ashamed of what's happening. Then a man in a suit rose. I represent the investment group supporting this deal. This is an opportunity, jobs, infrastructure, security. Let's not throw that away because of paranoia. Another voice, this time from a dock worker near the aisle. You want security? Try losing your house while billionaires buy your town. And then, silence. It was time. One by one, the council members leaned into their mics. Councilwoman Ruiz. Yes. For the sale, Councilman Dean. No. Too many unanswered questions. Councilwoman Ellis. Yes. Councilman Carter. No. The tie now rested with Mayor Fenton. The room held its breath. She didn't speak right away, just stared at the paper in front of her, fingers gripping the edge like it might slip from the table. Then, yes. The motion passes, 3-2. Gasps, a few shouted curses, others just sat there as if the air had been sucked out of the walls. JD didn't move. He had fought. He had shown them the contract, the tunnels, the patterns across the world. He had stood before Congress, taken calls from embassies, and walked the rusting docks of this town in the pouring rain. But tonight, none of that mattered. The people had spoken, but they hadn't understood what they'd given away. Mayor Fenton tapped the gavel gently. We move forward with the development as outlined. JD stepped outside into the night air, which felt suddenly heavier than before. Behind him, voices clashed, some angry, some relieved, most confused. Ellie caught up with him on the steps. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded slowly. They didn't vote for a port, he whispered. They voted for a way out. And they don't know it leads somewhere worse. She glanced back at the building. It's done? JD looked toward the harbor, where the faint silhouettes of idle cranes still stood under the dim glow of sodium lights. No, he said quietly. It's just been signed. That's not the same thing as finished. He began walking down the sidewalk alone, the night echoing with fragments of conversations, distant truck engines, and the soft lapping of water against steel. Behind him, a woman from the council meeting stepped outside, phone in hand, scrolling the news. The headline read, Bayport votes to approve port sale despite growing national outcry. And beneath it, a single comment with a dozen likes. Some towns don't get invaded, they open the door. The headlines arrived faster than the facts. By morning, JD's name was no longer tied to leaked contracts or surveillance tunnels. It was being stapled to talking points. The same news channels that had once aired his speeches now hosted panels wondering if he had gone too far. On one network, a polished anchor smirked at the camera. Senator Vance versus the world. Again. He's made enemies out of allies, trade partners, and now, reality. The chyron below read, J.D. Vance, patriot or paranoid? J.D. sat in his office, watching in silence as the words played across 3 different monitors, each from a different network, all offering the same conclusion. Obstructionist, alarmist, anti-business. Ellie walked in, holding a stack of printouts. "This is just the last 12 hours, she said. "Half the op-eds are quoting each other. No one's fact-checking the original source." He took the papers and flipped through them. Senator Vance's distrust of trade could cripple Gulf progress. What is J.D. really after? Bayport chose jobs. Vance chose fear. He tossed them on the table, eyes still on the screen. One host leaned into his camera and declared, "The senator's single-handed crusade against international development is setting a dangerous precedent. What's next? Closing our airports?" Laughter followed. J.D. didn't flinch. But it wasn't just the media. His phone, once buzzing with supportive colleagues, was now hauntingly still. One senator's aide called to reschedule indefinitely. Another texted him late at night with a short message. "You're not wrong, but no one wants to touch it right now." Even friends were cautious. J.D. had become radioactive. The final blow came when Senator Burke, who had privately expressed concern over the port deal, went on record saying, "While I respect my colleagues' passion, I believe in facts over fear. Our ports are not under siege." Ellie caught his reaction. "That's the same man who called the inspection clause a red flag last week." J.D. nodded slowly. "The red flag's not on the paper anymore. It's on me." She hesitated, then added, "A campaign donor called. Said they're freezing contributions until you shift messaging." He stood, walked to the window. Below, Washington pulsed on as if nothing was unraveling. Cars passed. Lobbyists crossed streets with coffee cups, business as usual, and yet for J.D., everything had changed. "I knew they'd push back," he said, "but I didn't think they'd erase the whole conversation." Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then, "They can spin the headlines, but they can't scrub the footage." People saw the clip. They read the contract. He turned to her. "That's what scares them." There was a knock at the door, an intern holding a delivery envelope. "From Bayport," the young man said. J.D. opened it. Inside was a folded copy of the town's original charter, wrapped in a handwritten note. "You were right. We didn't understand the price. Some of us do now. Don't stop." He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders relaxed just slightly. "They want me to back off," he said, setting the note beside his coffee. "But they've already drawn the line for me." He looked at the television one last time, where a news anchor laughed at a cartoon of him fencing windmills. Then he turned it off, not because he couldn't take the noise, but because he already knew what came next. The cemetery was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from silence, but from reverence. J.D. parked at the edge of the gravel lot and walked the rest. No press, no staff, just him, a jacket zipped up against the spring wind, and a small bouquet of white carnations in one hand. He knew the path by heart. Second row past the oaks, third stone from the flagpole. Raymond Vance, 1919 to 1998, United States Navy, Pacific Fleet, World War II. He stood when others ran. The headstone was simple, the kind his grandfather would have approved of. Nothing ornamental, just truth, carved in granite. J.D. knelt, set the flowers down, and let the stillness settle over him. He hadn't been here in almost a year, not because he'd forgotten, but because these days, stillness was a luxury. He brushed a leaf from the base of the stone and spoke softly, almost like he was interrupting something. "I didn't come to ask for advice," he said. "I think I already know what you'd say." He looked up at the sky, gray and unmoving. "They're selling what you bled for." The words caught in his throat. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just real. He took a slow breath. "I stood on that Senate floor and told them this was more than trade, that it was an invasion in slow motion. They laughed. Then they erased me." His hand tightened slightly against his knee. "And the people back home? Some get it. Most don't. They think jobs now matter more than freedom later. And maybe I can't blame them." I've seen what desperation does. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, worn at the edges. It showed a younger J.D., maybe 9 or 10, standing beside his grandfather at a Memorial Day event. Ray had one hand on his shoulder and the other resting on a flag-draped rifle. "I still remember what you told me that day," J.D. whispered. "The flag doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to the people brave enough to carry it." He nodded slowly. "I carry it now, not with a rifle, not with a uniform, but in rooms where it's easier to be quiet than right." The wind stirred the edges of the grass. Overhead, the flag at the entrance of the cemetery waved gently, just once. J.D. stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans. "I don't know how this ends," he said, "but I know what it costs if I quit. I know what silence buys." He looked down at the headstone one last time, voice firm now. "So I'll keep going, not for applause, not for votes, but because some things aren't for sale, especially not what's buried here." He turned and walked back toward the car, each step slower than usual, but more certain. And behind him, the cemetery faded back into stillness. Only the flag remained in motion, unfolding and folding again in the breeze, like a breath waiting to be drawn. The video was only 42 seconds long. "My unit escorted cargo through compromised ports. You can't imagine what it's like knowing someone in a suit a continent away decided your landing zone was a bargain ship." She pulled a coin from her jacket, one she'd carried since Afghanistan, laid it on the table. "You want to trade? Here's mine. This bought me a medic and 11 more seconds of life. I won't trade that for your global partnerships." By now, the room had changed. Even the previously skeptical senators sat still. No one reached for coffee. No one scrolled through a phone. Then J.D. rose again. "I've been called paranoid, alarmist, unreasonable. But let me ask you, if those who've seen the cost of compromise are now sounding the alarm, is it still paranoia, or just too painful to admit they're right?" The clip would later trend on multiple platforms under the tag, #ports aren't for sale. The boys' TikTok had lit the spark. The veterans' testimony gave it weight, gravity, authority. Outside the hearing, a reporter stopped J.D. "Senator, do you really think this hearing changes anything?" J.D. smiled, tired but defiant. "It already did. Now everyone's watching." The hearing had gone quiet again. Following the testimonies of seasoned veterans and security experts, a new name was called. No rank, no academic title, just 3 words: Elaine Maddox, civilian. She rose slowly from her seat. In her hands was a folded flag. J.D. turned to watch her approach the microphone, her frame small but her presence magnetic. Her clothes were simple, black slacks and a faded blue blouse, but the grief in her eyes was dressed in something far heavier. She stood silently for a moment. The room didn't fidget, not this time. "My name is Elaine Maddox," she began, voice thin but steady. "My son, Corporal Joshua Maddox, served out of the naval base down in Pascagoula. He never got to turn 23. Her fingers tightened around the flag. "He was on the USS Ross when it intercepted an illegal arms shipment headed to a hostile port, one that used to be under civilian control until it wasn't." She glanced around the room, at the senators, the aides, the press. Her voice didn't rise, it deepened. "He didn't come home, so our flag could be rolled up and shipped out like freight." Silence. Someone in the back sniffled. "My boy believed in something. He believed that some lines don't get crossed, no matter how poor a town is or how big the check looks. He believed we still had people in this building who'd fight for the land under our feet, not just the screens in our pockets." She placed the flag gently on the table. "I came here not to accuse, but to remind." She took a breath, faltered just a little. "Remind you that for every port you lease, for every clause you overlook, there's a family somewhere reading a folded letter. There's a room at home that hasn't been touched. There's a bed made by hands that won't wake again." Across the table, one senator stared blankly. Another slowly took off his glasses. Elaine steadied herself once more. This time her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You say this is just business, that it's just a transaction. But tell me, what kind of country turns its coastlines into IOUs? What kind of leader signs away land that soldiers died protecting?" Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. You know why that flag's folded into a triangle? Because it represents what's left when someone gives everything. I'm here to ask you to do just a fraction of that. The silence in the room became weight. No reporters whispered, no aides shuffled papers, just the sound of a mother's breath, heavy, honest, and breaking. JD closed his eyes. For all the facts and files and flash drives, this was what the committee hadn't expected. Not a chart, not an expert, but a mother who lost everything and still believed in what the country stood for. As Elaine returned to her seat, someone began to clap, quietly at first, then stronger and stronger. Soon the room echoed, not with applause for performance, but for courage. The next speaker didn't rise right away. They didn't know how to follow her. They didn't need to, because for that moment, Elaine Maddox was the voice of a nation that hadn't been heard in far too long. By dawn the next morning, it wasn't just a headline, it was a directive. The Department of Transportation, under growing public scrutiny and pressure from national security leaders, issued a rare emergency suspension order on the proposed port sale. All operations were to be halted, no paperwork finalized, no foreign contractors allowed on site. Everything for now was frozen, pending a full federal review, filmed vertically, shaky at first, and recorded in a high school bedroom with a flag taped to the wall and textbooks scattered across a desk in the background. The boy looked barely 17, baseball cap turned backwards, voice cracking slightly as he spoke straight into the front camera. My name's Kyle. I live in Bayport. My dad lost his job when the shipyard closed. My uncle served in the Navy. I've watched J.D. Vance get torn apart all week for saying things most grown men are too afraid to say out loud. He paused, glanced down at his phone, then looked back up. They call him paranoid, a joke, anti-trade, but I watched his speech, all of it. I read the contract. It's not paranoia, it's betrayal. And the worst part, we almost clapped for it. Then came the moment that stuck, the last line. I'm 17, I don't have a vote, but if I did, it'd go to the guy who got his mic cut and still kept talking. He hit upload at 9:14 p.m. By midnight, it had 30,000 views. By sunrise, it had over 1 million. JD was reviewing committee notes when Ellie barged into his office, holding her phone, eyes wide. You need to see this. He watched the clip in silence. The voice was raw. The setting was unpolished. But the truth, it cut sharper than any debate stage soundbite. That's real, JD said quietly. Ellie nodded. It's spreading fast. Veterans groups are reposting it. A Teamsters chapter in Pittsburgh just stitched it with a clip from your town hall. Dock workers in Oakland are holding signs that say, "We hear you, Bayport." Within 24 hours, the video had crossed 5 million views. Cable networks that had mocked JD the week before were now quoting the TikTok in segments titled "The Voice of the Forgotten" and "Why This Teen's Video Hit a National Nerve." A news anchor who had once laughed at JD on air now asked solemnly, "Have we overlooked something important in this port deal?" The most unexpected endorsement came from a retired general who tweeted, "I may not agree with everything Senator Vance says, but I'll take uncomfortable truth over packaged silence any day." And under that, a reply from a longshoreman in New Jersey, "He stood alone for us." Time we stood back. JD sat back in his chair, staring at the phone still playing the video in a loop. The boy's words echoed, not with fire, but with something stronger. Clarity. It wasn't policy analysis or party line defense. It was a simple truth, told by someone too young to be jaded and too honest to be ignored. He looked at Ellie. "He doesn't even have a vote." "No," she said, "but he just gave yours a second wind." JD exhaled. They hadn't won. Not yet. But for the first time since the vote, since the headlines, since the embassy's warning, the silence wasn't winning anymore. The noise was coming back. But this time, it was coming from the people. The hearing room wasn't grand, just polished oak, overhead fluorescents, and rows of microphones. But it was full. Press cameras lined the back. News outlets had labeled it a political stunt. JD didn't care. What mattered was who sat in the front row. Men and women with silver in their hair and steel in their posture. Uniforms long replaced by worn flannel and medals pinned not to their chests, but held quietly in weathered palms. JD stood at the center table, nodded once, and began. This isn't about left or right. It's about a line we forgot we still had. He motioned to the first witness. Retired Navy Captain Harold Eames, 74, walked slowly to the microphone. His limp whispered of old injuries. His eyes, however, still burned. I served in the Gulf. I've watched port takeovers before, from the other side of the radar screen. Let me be clear, ports aren't just concrete and cranes. They are the first and last breath of a sovereign nation's trade, security, and survival. He paused. Let the silence fall heavy. We lost sailors defending ours, and now I hear Congress is letting foreign, state-backed contractors run them. For a 30-year lease and a couple ribbon cuttings? He looked at JD. They took bullets for these shores. And we sell them for contracts? A murmur rippled across the room. Next was economist Dr. Elena Park, stoic, crisp, not one for theatrics. She showed a simple slide, red dots on a map, ports in Sri Lanka, Greece, Djibouti, all under Chinese state-linked control. All in debt, all now host to dual-use military infrastructure. This isn't about economics, she said, voice level. This is about encirclement. Quiet, legal, permanent. Then came Staff Sergeant Maria Tennyson. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. It hit the wire at 6:42 a.m. By 7:03, it was the top trending topic on every news network. But J.D. Vance wasn't in front of a camera. He wasn't taking interviews or drafting tweets. He was alone, seated in the corner of his dimly lit Senate office, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at the printed order on his desk. The paper still smelled like toner, still felt warm. He didn't smile. He just exhaled. From the far side of the room, a staffer cautiously approached. Sir, CNN wants a comment. JD shook his head once. Not now. Because he knew what no headline could say. This wasn't a victory. It was a stay of execution. A pause button on a freight train. He picked up the order again, rereading the paragraph that stated, in light of credible national security concerns, this office is suspending further advancement of any transaction involving control of U.S. coastal infrastructure by foreign state-influenced entities. He muttered to himself. Took 'em long enough. The office was quiet except for the tick of the clock and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. On the wall, the map of red pin still stretched across continents, Djibouti, Sri Lanka, Greece, now Alabama, with lines connecting like veins in a warning system no one had wanted to see until it was almost too late. His mind went back to Elaine Maddox, her voice, her flag, her grief that turned a silent room into thunder. That was what had moved the needle. Not the flash drive, not the hearings. A mother's truth, a nation's reckoning. JD stood and walked slowly toward the window. The city outside looked normal. Commuters, horns, the blur of traffic. But something had shifted. For once, inertia had lost. But he knew how this worked. Delays turned into debates. Debates turned into watered-down compromises. The forces he was up against didn't retreat. They recalculated. A knock broke the silence again. Sir, his aide repeated, NBC, Fox, and Politico are all asking, what's your next move? JD didn't turn around. He kept looking out the window. His voice was low but firm. Tell them this isn't a win. It's a delay. But it's a start. The aide hesitated, then nodded and left. Back at his desk, JD sat again. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't look at his phone. Instead, he reached for a notepad, the same one he used that night after the midnight call, pages now half filled with names, dates, and questions no one wanted to answer. At the top of a new page, he scribbled one word in capital letters, watch, because they would try again. Maybe not at this port, maybe not even in this country, but this model, the silent acquisition of power disguised as economic mercy, it wasn't going away, and so neither was he. The room stayed quiet, heavy with the knowledge that fighting back doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it just means being the last one awake when the rest of the world tries to fall asleep again. The envelope was unmarked, no government seal, no printed logo, just a town name in the corner, barely legible, and a stamp already half faded. JD almost threw it into the pile with the others. Angry letters, death threats, invitations, PR spam. But something about the weight made him pause. It wasn't thick, but it was heavier than it looked. He tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined, torn from a notebook, handwritten in blue ink. Senator Vance, I won't pretend I was ever on your side. We shook hands and I smiled for the cameras. But I thought you were another headline hunter. When I supported that deal, I truly believed it was the only lifeline this town had left. You saw betrayal, I saw survival. But I was wrong. JD's eyes narrowed. He sat down slowly. You were right. We didn't see it. But now, we can't unsee it. After your hearings aired, after the veteran's testimony, and that mother, God help me, that mother, our phones rang off the hook. Vets, widows, dock workers who hadn't been heard in years. They didn't talk about jobs. They talked about flags and roots, and what it means when a town gives away its front door to strangers who never knock. Last night we held a new vote. This time it was 5-0. The port deal is canceled. JD looked up. For a long moment he just stared at the far wall. The red pins on the map hadn't moved. The steel photo of his grandfather still stood by the window. The emergency order from the department was still tacked to the corkboard. But something was different now. This wasn't a suspension. It was reversal. You didn't shout, you warned. And I finally listened. If no one said it yet, thank you for giving us the chance to take it back before we couldn't. Mayor Bill Harlan, Port Stillwater, Alabama. JD folded the letter with care, not because it was fragile, but because it mattered. He slid it into a folder labeled personal, then placed it inside a locked drawer. Not everything needed to be on display. Some victories were quieter than others, but no less powerful. He walked over to the window. The Capitol dome was bathed in a wash of pale gold morning light. It looked peaceful, but he knew better now than ever. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was what you earned by facing it. The phone rang. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the corner of his desk. On it, still taped from months ago, was the photo of the empty docks. And now beside it, he added something new. The envelope. The mayor's envelope. Unadorned, real. Two things that had once meant failure. Now standing together, they told a different story. A story of what happens when someone listens before it's too late, and what's possible when courage is louder than comfort. The projector flickered to life in room 214 at Maple Grove High School. Civics class, third period. Chairs squeaked. A few students scrolled through their phones until the first clip started. Who here knows what a port lease is? Mr. Donnelly asked. Silence. Okay, how about this? Who here's heard of Senator J.D. Vance? Still mostly silence, until the opening seconds of JD's speech filled the screen. The tone was firm, not angry, resolute, no podium pounding, no theatrics. Just a calm voice laying out how a small town nearly sold away 40 years of sovereignty and how no one in Washington blinked, except one man. As the video played, phones stopped glowing. Heads turned toward the screen. In the back row, a student named Evan leaned forward. He wasn't the usual one to speak, but when the clip ended and Mr. Donnelly paused, Evan's voice cut through the quiet. Why did only one person say anything? The class stirred. Some nodded. Others just stared. Mr. Donnelly walked over to the windowsill and looked out. The town beyond hadn't changed. Same grocery store, same post office. But his eyes lingered on the flag over the school entrance, fluttering gently in late autumn wind. Because sometimes, he said slowly, one is all it takes. Another hand shot up. But didn't they call him paranoid? Yes, Mr. Donnelly said, an anti-business, and a fearmonger. But then the mayor changed his vote. Then the deal was canceled. And now, he pointed to the wall where a laminated newspaper clipping was taped beside the whiteboard. Port sale blocked after Vance hearings go viral. Columbus Dispatch. Do you know why I showed you this? When he asked. It's not just about ports. It's about civic muscle. About noticing when something's wrong and having the nerve to speak up even if no one else does. The classroom was still, not bored, thinking. Evan whispered to the girl next to him, "That's scary, though." What if he hadn't? She didn't answer. She just nodded. Then someone in the front row said, almost too quietly to hear, "Then it would have been 40 years. Mr. Donnelly clapped his hands gently. Exactly, 40 years. And no one would have even known until it was too late. That's why civics matters. It's not about memorizing names. It's about knowing when to raise your hand. He glanced at the clock. Class was nearly over. As the bell rang, he added one last thought. This isn't about politics. It's about consequence. Legacy doesn't always come from titles. Sometimes it comes from a moment. One voice, one vote, one decision. Evan was the last to leave. He lingered by the door. "Hey, Mr. D, did he win anything from all that?" Mr. Donnelly smiled softly. "Maybe not a trophy," he said, "but maybe something better." The office was quiet that morning, eerily so. The sunlight pushed through the half-closed blinds in slender streaks, settling over mahogany shelves stacked with congressional reports, military citations, and dusty binders. But it wasn't the shelves that visitors noticed anymore. It was the wall. Directly behind JD's desk, 3 objects now occupied a single frame, carefully arranged in a custom shadow box. At the top, the original port sale contract, pages yellowing slightly at the edges, its typed paragraphs now stripped of power, but never of meaning. Below it, a photograph. The town's harbor on a foggy morning, cranes long dormant, the water still and unsure. And beside it, folded with precise care, was the handwritten letter from the mayor. The same one who once backed the deal with shaking hands and desperate hope, and who later reversed course with a single sentence that had since etched itself into JD's memory. "You were right. We didn't see it, but now we can't unsee it." Underneath the glass, centered beneath all 3 relics, a plaque carved from oak bore just one line. He didn't guard a dock. He guarded the idea of home. JD rarely spoke about the wall, but he noticed how often people paused in front of it. Veterans, staff interns, once even a political rival. No one said much. They just stood there, as if the silence itself carried weight. Some saw the frame as a symbol of what was almost lost. Others, a reminder of what could still be taken if no one stood watch. For JD, it was neither decoration nor trophy. It was a quiet boundary line between what had been protected and what must still be defended. And though the cameras no longer chased him, and the hearings had long wrapped, the image on the wall kept whispering a truth no soundbite could carry. Because when they tried to sell the harbor, he had stood, not in fury, but in stillness at the gate, and he didn't move. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with armies or applause, but with conviction when no one's watching. J.D. Vance's stand against the sale of a strategic American port wasn't just political resistance. It was a quiet refusal to let fear or comfort dictate our future. What began with a midnight call and a wall full of red pins became a reminder that even one voice, if anchored in truth, can shift the course of a town, and maybe a nation. This story isn't about party lines or hero worship. It's about the cost of silence, the weight of legacy, and the courage it takes to ask, who are we selling ourselves to when we stop asking questions? The final image, a letter, a photo, a plaque, tells us something powerful. Protecting our values doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like holding the line until others finally see the danger for themselves. What would you have done if you saw the deal happening in your hometown and no one else stood up? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice might inspire someone else to speak next. If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.